American society is kind of suffering from anxiety. And of the 7 emotional groups, and this is research going on down at Lincoln, of the 7 emotional groups, anxiety is the one which causes us to stop and change our behaviors. And so what we see a lot in cable media, specifically or perhaps in the presidential election, is an elevation of anxiety. And probably the best way to lower anxiety in your life is to get out away from electronic devices and engage your neighbors. Well, what's important, what we know is that contact between people breeds trust, and a lack of contact breeds distrust. This is Robert Putnam's theory on bullying alone. And what you see is Americans they used to use the term cocooning, and what Putnam kind of introduced into the academic world is the term hunkering down. And so people are withdrawing from society, and as they do, what term he uses is social capital goes down. And as social capital goes down, as the relationship between individuals or groups goes down, distrust goes up. And so you see a prominence of an elevation of distrust in society because we're not engaging each other equally. And what's important to understand, and I think what we've kind of lost sight of in society, is while you have a right to free speech, you don't have the right to not be offended by someone else's free speech. And so we kind of need to listen, and rather than telling people they're wrong or trying to win that debate, I think what we want to do is understand why they think what they think. And so no one has a monopoly on the truth. And so you want to go into the public sphere and you want to have your discussions with people about what you believe and why you believe it. But I think it's important, and what we try to teach here at the university is how do you have those discussions without assuming that you have to win that discussion. And so if you allow the other person to win, or if you go into it with maybe listening more than you're talking, those are constructive engagements. And through constructive engagement, you're going to build trust. And so what we see in society today is a profound lowering of trust, not only among individuals, but among groups, particularly along racial lines and religious lines, but also among the institutions of government. So trust for our government is at an all-time historical low. And so whether you want to blame President Obama or President Trump, the Republicans and the Democrats, I don't think that's really what's causing the problem. What's causing the problem is that people have withdrawn. And so we recently, kind of giving an anecdotal story, my family recently moved out into the suburbs, and it didn't take long to figure out that your lawn has a lot of different messages to the neighborhoods, and one of them is it's a moat. And it prevents people from having conversations. And what we need to do is get back and finding out how we do those conversations. So in Putnam, to kind of give a synopsis of Robert Putnam's Bullying Alone, what he noticed over time is that while the number of people bowling went up, the number of people engaged in bowling leagues went down. So they were, in essence, bowling alone. And what he's talking about is we are leaving behind those inter-group contacts, and we're insulating ourselves from each other. And what we need to recognize is the outcome of that is a term called radical individualism, or the idea that I get my rights, but I don't have any responsibilities that accompany those rights. That's in direct conflict with the words of James Madison and Thomas Jefferson and the founders of the nation. And so we need to engage other people, not in a way where I win, you lose, but where I try to understand where you're coming from. And I think what we realize pretty quickly is we all have the same interest, which is how do I, get to retirement? How do I get my kids through higher education? And how do I keep my job? And all Americans, I think, basically have those same fears or those same concerns. So we're not really that different from each other, particularly in Nebraska, which is probably the most moderate state in the country. Well, social media is not really engagement. There's a guy named Hugh Heclo. He's a famous political scientist, and he talks about how Americans have access to more information than ever before, but that we only have a superficial knowingness about that. In other words, you and I can engage on Facebook, but it doesn't mean we're listening to each other. And again, I think the process of listening to how and trying to understand everybody sees the world uniquely through their own vision. And try to understand how and why that other person sees the world differently than you do, that's what cures the problem. That's what bridges the divides. And so the message we get today is you need to fight for your rights. And it's always positioned in this sort of acrimonious, combative sort of language. And really what we need to do is figure out how to understand someone that sees the world differently than you do. And we're failing. We do a poor job. And we need to engage people. And it's hard because in American society, you see the divide typically along racial lines. And I think, you know, when you look at it along racial lines, what's important to understand is no one wants to be your token friend. And so how do you develop genuine friendships with people that don't look like you, that don't talk and think like you? And that's more difficult because people are very sensitive about it and they want to be a genuine person in their own right. But I think what we need to see is that it's going to take time to reach those relationships where Bob is my friend. It just so happens that maybe Bob's gay, or it's incidental that Bob's not Caucasian like I am, where that you become blind to that because Bob's your friend. But initially when you go out and meet people, you're going to immediately categorize them. You know, your schema, the way your brain works, and that's a fight or flight mechanism that was bred into the human being long before civilization, and that it's a survival tool. And we need to overcome that by just saying, by trying to understand other people. Well, you know, the new covenant, so it's Easter, right? So I can talk religion. The new covenant, what Jesus says is love God, love your neighbor, right? That's the new law of Christianity. And I think what's preventing us from doing that is segregation. And I don't think segregation is intentional. I think we all get busy living our lives. We do what's convenient. You know, if you're driving kids to school, then you got to go to work and come home and cook a meal, as most women are probably doing. They don't really have time to develop that necessary social grace with their neighbors. It's tough. And so I think that we need to be more aware of how to engage other people, the importance of that engagement, and to be less busy. And we need to try to figure out how do we make time to engage someone. And because I don't know about you, but I think people feel very lonely in a lot of ways. And that's the function of social media, which is I can dip in and out anytime I want, and I feel less lonely. But the reality is it's a very false pretense. And so I think the hope is to be less busy, to try to engage people. And if you have young kids, you know, one of the things I noticed in my own family is that my wife was able to engage the mothers of the other kids. And that developed a social network for us. And I think that's important, and that maybe we underappreciate that. But I think for those of us that are working, you need to be aware of your own social network. You need to make an effort to try to get outside of that social network. And you need to understand is that the person that you're talking to, even though they may feel differently than you do on this specific issue, I don't think they're inherently evil. I think that they just don't understand the world that maybe you do, the way that you do. And it's that process of trying to understand why do they think what they think that matters, as opposed to telling them how to think, which we all want to do that.